Okay, so episode 1
Episode 1.
of maybe 1,
One of one, yeah.
or maybe 24, depending on how this goes. But
Yeah,
we have 24 books in the canon, I believe.
indeedy. And there they all are.
Lovely. So yes, this time we'll be doing Tintin in the Land of the Soviets.
Yeah.
So how have you been reading this? You've been reading a kind of fancy hardback, haven't you?
This one isn't the Congo, the next one is. This one is just the
Ah,
back. But I didn't own it, which is kind of strange because I thought I had them all. So because when we were kids growing up
yes.
in Harrogate, the sprawling metropolis of Harrogate, I think I was collecting them, and either you or your bro had them all already, I think.
I don't think my brother had them all. I think my sister-in-law maybe had them all because it was Kathy who bought me my first Tintin book,
Oh,
and
really?
that was probably around 7 or 8 when she started going out with my brother. She was like 10, 11 years older than me, but
Yeah.
I was about 7 or 8, and she got me for Christmas the Castafiore Emerald, which is, I think, probably the least high-octane Tintin book out of the whole 24, because I don't think they even get out of Captain Haddock's Country Pilot Marlin Spike in the whole book,
Yeah.
which is kind of weird for Tintin. But
Well,
yeah,
that's right, isn't it? That's the sort of plot of that one, isn't it? Because I know they included Bianca Castafiore in the movie, the Spielberg movie, which was kind of a mixture of several of the books, really. But we'll come to that, obviously. But but yeah, I
yeah,
think I probably had. I might have skipped ahead and had the space ones because obviously I was into Star Wars from a very
yeah.
young age. So I think I will have asked my mum and dad if I could, if what's this Tintin book, and they probably got me Tintin on the Explorers on the Moon and Destination Moon. So I think I had those ones first, and then started going back and getting the early ones. But I don't know if I've ever owned Tintin: The Land of the Soviets.
I
Which
think I probably did eventually get it because it wasn't like in English till kind of quite late. It wasn't like released in English at all. I think I had a French version for a while in hardback because I used to kind of like when I went on holiday with my parents, I used to try and pick up Tintin books in different languages. But
yeah,
I don't think I've owned the English version until now on iPad.
no, and I didn't own because they're all down there. I didn't own Tintin in the Congo in English at all because it for a while it wasn't, and obviously that's the next book, so we can talk about that reasons why that wasn't in English. Um, but the
Yes.
Soviets one is the only one not to have been in color, apart from I think that recently they've turned it into a color. A few years ago, they made a French and possibly a couple of other languages. They did it in color, but in English, it's currently just black and white. So, which I really like because it's kind of it's got that because apparently Hergé was writing it. He just made it up every week. He didn't go, I've got this great big plot. He just went, I'm going to just have cliffhangers. So this is why in the first few pages, even Tintin and Tanoe get into these ridiculous scrapes where they have a crash and then they have another crash and then they fall off a cliff and then they get hit by a train and all that. But it's got that really great sort of snappy reporter newspaper vibe to it.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying that at this stage, this being Hergé's first Tintin adventure, he kind of
Yeah,
probably didn't realize that this was going to actually be in book format, and that it would probably just be serialized in this children's supplement in this Belgian newspaper.
yeah,
So yeah, this particular book feels particularly kind of episodic, and there isn't any real great narrative arc or subplots or anything. There's just these short kind of cliffhangers that kind of resolve all of a sudden, and then you're kind of into the next bit of action.
yeah. It almost reminded me of like Buster Keaton or a silent movie in that he'd get like, he'd say there's many bits where he like sees a copper and he has to evade capture by the police, and then he does like within 1 or 2 pages, and then he'll like get kidnapped and then escape that, and then yeah, so it's very escapist and sort of episodic, yeah, rather than the later ones are a bit more story led. So there's a lot of comedy, like a lot of comedy, but it actually does set up a lot of what Tintin is all about, which is he's very tenacious and Snowy is funny, and they get into scrapes and they chase and they drive cars and fly planes and stuff. It's actually really, really like action packed.
There is this like, yeah, real sense of unending, never-ending movement in the book. It's like
Yeah,
it doesn't, they don't stay still for 1 second, which kind of is Tintin and crossing continents and all those sort of exciting kind of James Bondy things that he does.
yeah,
But it's interesting as well that it's kind of quite planes, trains, and automobiles everywhere. But
yeah.
it's the story started to be published in 1929, so actually historically this is a story that is closer to, I don't know, Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes adventures than it is to James Bond, which is kind of interesting because it does feel quite modern and kind of quite action packed.
It does, and I almost like, again, it's like there's bits in it where the slapstick is fantastic, and I mean, obviously they continued that when you think about Tintin and you think about the Thompson twins coming in later on as Captain Haddock. Slapstick is the huge part of Tintin. It's like crashing into lampposts and falling off things, crashing into each other and stuff. Like there's a bit where the bad guys are invading Tintin's room, and Tintin's like, oh, they're just outside, and you can hear the guy running. So he opens the door, and the guy flies in and stuff. It's really like, it's straight out of Laurel and Hardy. You can imagine like James Finlayson with his moustache going, you know what I mean? It's very much played for. He's almost like a silent comedian, Tintin, at times. And then I love the fact that you hear Snowy's thoughts all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of quite an interesting partnership right from the outset.
Yeah, they're a double act, aren't they? Even though they can't hear each other. I mean, well, I think, does Snowy understand Tintin, but Tintin doesn't understand Snowy?
Kind of, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess
kind of.
that's dogs and humans, isn't it? Because obviously, I think my dog Edgar understands me. I don't know what he's saying, although I can guess, from how he whines and growls and moves and stuff. But he's a wire fox terrier, isn't he?
Yes.
And I love fox terriers; they're beautiful. And actually, he is very. I've met fox terriers, and they are like Snowy. They're incredibly perky, and half the time, if they could speak, they probably would be criticizing what you were doing. Like there's a bit in this book where Tintin crashes the plane, and Snowy just says, "I must say, Tintin, you fly in a very peculiar manner." Which is nicely sort of understated. And I love the fact that mostly it's a boy and his dog. I know later on there are other characters, but Tintin is generally on his own most of the time. He doesn't really, he has people that he touches base with, like Captain Haddock, and he goes on adventures with him. But it's always him and Snowy. It's always a boy and his dog, like kind of like, who, what am I thinking of? Just William,
Yeah.
and his dog. They just go around all the time, and they're the double act, and everyone else is the surrounding character.
Yeah, this book, though, particularly, I think, feels Tintin and Snowy against the world. He kind of feels like everybody else is the enemy. There's like no sympathetic, friendly characters that
No,
are involved in at this stage. And it's nice as the series progresses that those kind of more sympathetic characters are added because it kind of feels like I got a sense in this particular book that Tintin's almost like this kind of Terminator character because he gets into all these scrapes and always seems to manage to get out of them, no matter how ridiculous that seems at some situations.
yeah,
But it also seems to be like everybody is in the book is as soon as he leaves Brussels,
yeah,
everybody's there to be sort of killed or attacked or like there's a couple of scenes in the book where he did he blow up a kind of gasoline truck driver for no reason? Like the guy's not doing anything wrong particularly.
yeah.
And another time his car's broken down and he just kind of starts beating up this passerby and then kind of forces him to blow up his tires or something. It's like,
I'm just looking at that bit here. Yeah, he's like, yeah. In fact, what it reminded me of was Indiana Jones, which I know that the story with Spielberg, and again, we can sort of come to Spielberg's movie when we're doing, Red Rackham's Treasure and so forth. But look, here is in fact my own Snowy.
oh yes, yes. Hello, Edgar.
There's a bit in Last Crusade where they crash the plane and then they steal a German guy's car and drive off, and the guy's like left with the jack going, and then someone said to Spielberg when he was doing Raiders of the Lost Ark, "This is so Tintin. You must love Tintin." And he goes, Oh, I don't know. So then sort of Spielberg discovers Tintin and starts going, yeah, Indiana Jones is like Tintin.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how he discovered Tintin. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how he discovered it. But yeah, someone definitely on Raiders did say to him, this is like Tintin. And he just went, oh, I'll have to check that out then. I think that's what happened. And obviously, I think him and Peter Jackson did a cracking job with the movie, because it did feel like they really respected the series, and that, you know, the artwork was all, which we, again, so much artwork to enjoy in future books. But I know Hergé himself said he thought that Soviets was quite crude in the end, and he tried to, I think he had to redraw several panels because they got damaged or something like that for publication. The original newspaper panels got damaged, but I actually, it's almost like a novelty that this is the one in black and white, because you don't get any more Tintin books in black and white now for 23 books. And it actually really works in black and white. I know, I'm sure it's great in color as well. It almost doesn't need to be this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably worth setting the scene a little for this book, just if anything, to try and get Hergé off the hook here a bit, because
Yeah.
he does describe this book as a sin of his youth. So this is his first big job with the Petit Vingtième, which is a children's supplement to the 20e siècle newspaper in Belgium. And he's the young Georges Remy, who's his nom de plume is Hergé, which is the letters RG, which is his initials backwards of his name, pronounced in French. So he's been taken on to head up this newspaper, and so his big idea is to have Tintin and his dog Snowy go and have this big adventure. And I think originally he wanted them to have a nice adventure in America, but Hergé's boss was a Catholic priest at the magazine called Abbot Norbert Vallée, and Norbert, as I'll call him. Norbert is kind of flirting with fascism. He's a friend of Mussolini. He's got a framed and signed photo of Mussolini on his desk, and he's persuading Hergé to do a story, take his boy detective to Russia to show up this new Soviet regime after the revolution in 1917.
Yeah.
Not based on any research on Hergé's part. I think that Vallée gives this book to Hergé, which is essentially a kind of pamphlet called Moscow sans voile, which is Moscow unmasked, and this is like pure propaganda. It's by
Yeah.
this, and he uses a lot of the scenes from that book, I think, verbatim in the story. For instance, there's a section where the Bolsheviks, there's the having some kind of political vote, and so the Bolsheviks all have their guns pointed at the local peasants, saying that, you know, you must vote for the Communist Party candidates, and then
Yeah.
there's also
Yeah.
the scene in the book about all the factories that they're kind of showing the foreign journalists these factories in Moscow, but actually the factories don't work, and it's all kind of stage sets, and they're kind of burning kind of
Yeah.
tires and things to make the smoke come out and things like that.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think Hergé was kind of quite embarrassed about this, and, you know, at the time I don't think he'd even been out of Belgium. So I think a lot of his later books were a lot more thoroughly researched than this one.
I think they were, and I think like with Congo, because I've got, you know, again, I had to buy this recently because I'd always had the Danish version of Tintin in the Congo, bizarrely, because when I was in Denmark, I collected a bunch of. It's just lovely to go into bookshops in Denmark. They're absolutely beautiful in Denmark, and it comes with this on it. And you're like, okay, right, collector's edition, and it says, which again we'll come to in the next one, but it contains interpretation of a people that some people may find offensive, and I think that's true with Soviets as well. Is that he felt that he was sort of echoing the time by saying this is what the general attitude towards the Soviet Union was at the time, and I think in the end he sort of said, well, I regret it, but it's still there if you want to read it, which is the best way of doing it, I think, rather than sort of saying, no, this book will not be released. It's like, well, you need to read it if you want to understand what the public opinion was like at the time, and that we hopefully have improved since then, you know, especially with Congo. But
Yes,
yeah,
yeah. Well, even with this one, because the obviously the Soviets aren't pictured in a particularly good light, but also there's this scene where Tintin gets thrown into basically a dungeon by his Soviet captors, and there is this kind of torture chamber with these horrendous old torture implements, which seems to be staffed by these Chinese communists, because I think China had just gone communist like the year or two before, and so yeah, the Chinese come in for a bit of a rough ride as well in this one.
they do. And I love the fact that Snowy gets to do a couple of rescues, and when he comes to rescue Tintin, he basically just pops his head through the floor and says "cuckoo," and he does that a couple of times. He's like, "Cuckoo, it's me, Tintin." Yeah, it's a bit kind of Casino Royale, isn't it? They tie him to a chair, and you're like, thankfully they don't get a rope, and like that's him in the balls. But yeah, it's got that real, and it's sort of like, because I remember in the 90s you had a bunch of really very handsome communist propaganda posters. Do you remember?
Yeah, I found those in a loft in one of the apartments I had, and yeah, they I don't know where they are now, but they were like a set of these 40 or so kind of yeah, kind of really well preserved kind of communist posters, like beautiful artwork, and
Beautiful. Yeah, it's iconic, isn't it? And this is sort of anti-communist story, and it is anti-communist. I think a critic of the books, or said that Hergé said it's slightly ridiculous anti-communist propaganda as a story, but it does have that element. And Blue Lotus has got the sort of continuation of that. I think Blue Lotus he tried to make amends a bit with, because it's less jingoistic, isn't it, or anti-communist, but yeah, it does have a sort of vibe of that attitude, but it's the pre-Nazi, because obviously when we get into it, obviously the newspaper that he was working for got taken over by the Nazis, and I think that's why he had to stop doing political stuff. But because of that, you got all these amazing adventures that were more Indiana Jonesy and more escapist, because they were apolitical, because he didn't want to get into any trouble. But this one is definitely political. um,
yes.
for better or worse.
I mean, we should. I mean, obviously, this is a supplement to sort of a major Brussels Belgian newspaper. So there is, there's politics, and Hergé's been working in the offices for a few years before he's taken on this children's publication. So he sort of is embroiled in that world a bit. There does seem to have been some not research as such, but there does seem to be this guy called Robert Sexe, I think. And this is a photojournalist that some people say that the Tintin character was maybe partly based on, because this was a guy who worked for a French newspaper, and he was a photojournalist, and he was quite an intrepid reporter himself, and he'd go around the globe wearing +4s and riding a motorcycle, and he'd actually been to the Soviet Union. Yeah.
Tintin's +4s have actually come down a bit, because the
Oh,
last
yes.
I got this guy in Kensington. I think I got one, you one, and me one.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's right. But this guy Saxe, he'd been to the Soviet Union, and I think they say that Hergé probably was looking at some of his photographs to do some of the illustrations in the book. And
yeah,
actually, the illustrations are, it's like really interesting to see this kind of really early edition of Tintin.
yeah, yeah. Especially when the more you read, and when you read around the Tintin and stuff. Hergé was obsessed in later Tintin books of getting everything so lavishly accurate, to the point where cars and buildings and planes were photo accurate in terms of detail. And it actually used to drive him mad. I think at the expense sometimes of being an artist, he would drive himself mad trying to get something right. And he definitely didn't do that in this, because it's very, I mean, if you were a cartoonist for a major newspaper, you would be doing slightly political, funny satire, wouldn't you? So it's got that vibe, but it's got that very quick, sketchy, I mean, it's beautifully done. It's absolutely beautiful artwork, but it's not the same as the later stuff, which is so detailed, and the colors are just beautiful. And iconic. You know, if you were collecting Tintin memorabilia, I don't think it would have been as popular if the whole Tintin world was, you know, black and
Yes.
white. You know, even though it's really great and it's really funny, and what's great in it is the characters are just there. You know, Tintin is a kind of he's just so intrepid and tenacious, and he just goes after what he's going for, and he's quite cheeky and stuff. But the visuals are not there yet. Uh,
No, no.
no.
There is this one iconic moment, though, in just early on in the book, and I don't know if you spotted this, but you probably can't see this, but on page 9, this is the infamous moment where Tintin actually gets his quiff. He's up a tree hiding from the Ogpu, I think it's the Soviet police, and then
Yeah,
he kind of jumps out of a tree into a car and speeds off, and when he speeds off, the kind of wind takes his hair and it kind of goes backwards, and like for the rest of the book he has this quiff. Yeah, that's the frame.
that's amazing. I love
Yeah,
that, and that's oh yes. Before that, a couple of panels before, it's forward.
yeah,
That's great. They see again. That's like very Indiana Jones, like at the beginning of Last Crusade when they have that whole Indiana Jones as a boy, and he cracks the whip and gets Harrison Ford's scar on his face. It's like that little moment where you find out how he got all his little trademarks and stuff. That's a lovely moment actually. And I think actually they again in the movie, they sort of play on that because they have there's a some wind comes along and knocks Tintin's quiff down, and I think he tries to slick his hair back and it just goes going. Like it's never gonna not be like it's a difficult bit of hair, you know what I mean? And that's why it feels like that's what I love about Tintin. It's like I don't think he styles it that way. Like you know, like there's something about Mary. I think it's I think it just won't. It literally won't. Because I think and when he I think in the plane sequence in the movie as well, he's like his quiff is really near to the propeller, and
yeah.
it gets a bit of a trim. I love little touches like that.
The other thing in this book that I kind of didn't really recognize from when I was growing up reading the books was Belgium playing such a role in this particular book. Because certainly when I was young, I didn't really get the sense that Tintin, lived in any particular country. It was, I think it was almost deliberate, maybe in Hergé's later books, that but Belgium and where Tintin lives isn't like mentioned so much because by that time the books were being published right around the globe, really. So you kind of, it was
Yeah,
nice to be able to feel that this could happen in your country almost, that you could have
yeah.
this adventure and
That's
but
it.
it,
When I was a kid, I didn't necessarily think of him as Belgian. I think you think of him as English or American when you're a kid because you don't really understand that people can
yeah.
be. Your hero is, probably speaking like Hercule Poirot. He's not speaking like you. But yeah, I noticed at the end of the book, there's like, I can't wait to get back to Belgium. And if you were, you'd be like, oh yeah, Belgium, yeah.
Well, I think Belgium's a real character in this book because it gets kind of almost a bit meta because on the first page of the book you have this section where the very first frame of the first Tintin cartoon, it says, always seeking to satisfy its readers and to keep them informed of events abroad, the Petit Vingtième has just sent to Soviet Russia one of its top reporters, Tintin. Readers will be able to follow his remarkable adventures each week. Note that the editor can certify that all the photographs reproduced are absolutely authentic. So they're sort of saying that each of these pictures in the strips are kind of photos that he's sending back of the story.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
he gets waved off the Gare du Nord in Brussels in the first few frames, and
yeah,
then while this is going on, while these are being published in the Petit Vingtième, uh, Norbert Valès is kind of thinking of ways to hook in new readers. So what they do, I think, on April Fool's Day in 1930 is they published this notice in the main newspaper that he owns, basically purporting to be from the Soviet secret police, saying that they kind of they're very unhappy about the way Tintin is reporting on the Soviet
yeah.
news, and this must stop now. And then obviously there's an editorial piece that they
Right,
Hergé writes in response to this,
right.
and then at the end, like when the story is coming to an end, they put a huge advert in the paper to say Tintin will be back in town, will be arriving at the Gare du Nord on this date, and come along and wave him and Snowy back. And there's
Yeah,
this photo in this book that you very
Oh, you
kindly
actually got
got
a
me.
photo?
And this is the photo in the Gare du Nord, and they basically employed this kind of child actor to be Tintin, and they kind of got a dog and they bleached him white, and yeah, this is them welcoming Tintin back after his journey to the Soviet Union.
That's amazing. I mean, I read about that, and I read that they in the retelling of the story, Hergé said he was there, but it was actually this other guy that was there, and I think they sort of reinvented the story to make it up. But I love the sort of holistic nature of it. It's like it's the suspension of disbelief. It's like, yes, it's not, you're not just reading a cartoon. This is a real thing, and he's really out there, and the paper's involved, and it's just this great sort of universe sort of that he's built for him, isn't it? It's really charming, actually, that it was so real to so many people at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is as well, we should say, the longest of Tintin's books,
Yeah,
the longest adventure. And
yeah,
and I'm not sure why the later adventures were shorter. Maybe it was because they realized that this book did eventually get published.
yeah.
All of the sequences from this story got published as a book not long after the weekly cartoon strips stopped for this adventure. So maybe Hergé did have in his mind for future adventures, this has to be, a story that's going to be self-contained and going to sit in a book, and so maybe the later books were more designed for that.
Were the later books serialized at all?
I think they were, yes. I think they continued to be serialized in the newspapers.
Because I remember there are, even in as far as Destination Moon, which is sort of over halfway through the run, they were that each page ends in a bit of a cliffhanger. So if you look at it, the whole page laid out, and at the end it says, someone says, "Oh my God, oh no, something's happened." Even in the later books. But yeah, just looking through the list now and seeing where it goes. The only one missing from that is Tintin in the Congo, which
Yeah, for
is
obvious
not.
reasons, which we'll talk about next time.
Yes,
I,
yes.
I was trying to work out the actual how they were serialized, and I don't know. You probably like at the bottom of some of the cartoon strips, Hergé does sign his name, and I'm not sure if that reflects the end of each sequence.
I wonder if it was a double page spread, because most of the times he signed it, it's on the bottom right, not on the bottom left page. So it could have been, it might have been a double page spread. I mean, after all, it was his, he had great sway in the newspaper, didn't he? He was very popular. Obviously, the more popular it got, the more space he probably got. Like you were saying, he probably got to do all kinds of editorial in that newspaper and the cartoon and so forth. But yeah, it's funny. It's almost like there's elements of all of his latest stuff in this. You know how they say, like with North by Northwest, it's almost like the best of Hitchcock, North by Northwest. It's got little elements of everything that he's good at. The man alone, the misunderstanding, the adventure, the villain, all this kind of stuff. And this kind of has all the best of Tintin, even though it's not the best Tintin book. It's got car chases, it's got villains, it's got globetrotting, it's got planes crashing, it's got boats, it's got everything really. It's got silliness, it's got prisons, traps, woodland, it's got a lot in it.
It's got a very bizarre escape sequence from a basement dungeon where Tintin, for some reason, there's a kind of a diver's costume sitting there, which he puts on. And then you don't really realize this, but then he kind of lifts a brick out of the wall, and it turns out that he's right next to a river and he can kind of swim out of this jail. It's like, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
very bizarre.
He's stuck in a grate, isn't he, with the water, and Snowy's getting really miserable and sort of hanging off the grate, and Tintin does a massive sneeze, and then the grate flies out. He's been there for hours, and they're both like, oh. It's got ridiculous moments in it because it's a cartoon, it's a kid's cartoon, so it can't be fully believable. It's got to be very funny, it's got to have good payoffs, it's got to have, I love the bit where he's frozen solid and he starts to thaw because the bad guys light a fire. So if Tintin is frozen there, they spot him and they tilt him on his side and drag him off to their lair as a frozen block of ice. And it's like, well, that's just brilliant, the inventiveness of it. There we go. Actually opened on that page.
Beautiful.
They drag him up. And Snowy is so beautiful. He's so loyal. He always chases after Tintin. And there's certain things that always happen to Snowy. He always falls off things, rescues Tintin at least twice per book, and gets drunk.
Gets in a fight with the parakeet.
He always gets there's always a bird or a monkey or something that gets in a fight with. It's just fantastic. I mean, I really enjoyed reading it because it felt like, oh, we're back in this world again straight away, and it didn't feel like, oh, it's black and white, it's an early one, it's a little bit racist and so forth. It didn't feel like that. It just felt like this is a piece of history, and it was like with anything, it's good to start at the beginning, isn't it? And I think this is a great place to start. I don't know whether you give it to a very young kid, Bo, but collectors.
No, certainly the political indoctrination side of things isn't kind of too on the money. But so we should round this up, and so we've decided to have a rating system here, which we're going to use the 7 crystal ball system. So it's either 1, which is balls, or 7, which is kind of crystal. It's kind of like a brilliant book. So where does this sit on the 7 crystal balls scale?
I'm going to start generously with this one. I'm going to give it 4 crystal balls. So it's not balls, but it's not crystal. And I think that's because it's such a sort of joyous distillation of what Tintin's about. And it zips by, and it's got lots of inventiveness. It's very slapstick. It's very funny. And it does represent a lot of what I love about Tintin, even though it's not the best one by a country mile. And the black and white didn't bother me so much, but I am really now looking forward to getting onto color. So I'd probably give it 4 crystal balls.
Okay. I might be a little less generous. I thought that, I mean, there's so much there already, so much is already formed, but I struggled a bit with this whole thing of Tintin being a bit, as I say, like the Terminator. Like nothing seems to kind of. There's no jeopardy because he's never going to get killed. He's just going to escape from things in crazier and crazier ways. And he also seems to be him and Snowy against the world, which is kind of a bit, he's kind of a little bit kind of a bit of a psycho at times in this.
You heard it here first.
But otherwise, it's got all of the kind of the high octane chases, the never ending of never letting up speed and all of that stuff. And I'm going to give it a 3 balls.
I did consider giving it a 3, but I thought I'd be generous because we're just starting out. I'm sure there's a 3, a 2. I don't know if there's a 2 in there, but we'll come to a 2 later on.
Talking about 2, let's think about next time. So this is going to be Tintin in the Congo.
Yes, Tintin in the Congo. The Belgian Congo. So
yes.
Nice. So yeah, before that, I only had it in Danish, and I just used to enjoy the pictures because you couldn't get it in English. So I've only just got it in English. Comes with a disclaimer, which we'll go into next time. But again, it's an interesting piece of history. And they've kind of reluctantly said this can come into the collection, but it's not actually in the official list of books.
Yes. Well, buckle up your inappropriate racial stereotyping seatbelts. And see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.